Hi, everyone. This is Jillian with Court Junkie. Court Junkie is a true crime podcast that covers court cases and criminal trials using audio clips and interviews with people close to the cases. Court Junkie is available on Apple Podcasts and podcastone.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 295 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing much better.
Good.
You know, went on vacation. You and I had a scheduled week off. That was awesome. Came back, had Christmas, and then got COVID.
Yeah.
So last week, we weren't able to put out any episodes. Unfortunately, we really had no way to warn people. So I'm sure there were a lot of people who said, where's our episode?
Yeah, what happened?
But now you know. The good news is I'm feeling much better. My voice is back. I'm not so run down, but that was my first go round with COVID and was not fun. Do not like it.
No.
Not hoping to get it again. That's for darn sure.
Never again.
Never again. So before we do our Patreon shout outs, and because we were off a couple of weeks, just kind of hoping everybody had a good holiday season. You know, we didn't get to wish everybody a happy New Year's.
Yeah.
And, now we're in 2023, ready to crank it up.
That's right. Going to do it up.
So let's do Patreon. We had Wyatt Salisbury.
Hey, Wyatt.
Amanda Parker.
How you doing, Amanda?
Kate Kern.
Hey, Kate.
Cheryl Kuhn.
Well, appreciate that, Cheryl.
Jennifer Childs.
What's going on, Jennifer?
John Ritchie.
There's John.
Taylor Powell.
Hey, Taylor.
John O'Neill.
Man, that's awesome, John.
Whitney B.
Hey, Whitney.
Samantha.
Well, appreciate that, Samantha.
Casey Jones.
Good old Casey.
Karis Huerta.
Hey, Karis.
Sasha Gutierrez.
Well, appreciate that, Sasha.
Tiffany Donovan.
Hey, Tiffany.
Nancy Gregg.
Hi, Nancy.
Kendall Lawson.
Hey, Kendall.
Hazel Tafia.
That's awesome, Hazel.
Sky Vrooman.
Hey, Sky.
And Richard Clark jumped out at our highest level.
I appreciate that, Richard.
Yeah, so we appreciate the new support. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Lucy Burton.
There's Lucy.
So we appreciate the long-term support very much. For PayPal, we had great donations from Kimberly Herrick.
Hey, Kimberly.
Shael's Tax Service.
What's going on, Shael?
And Elizabeth Mitchell.
Hey, Elizabeth.
So thanks to all of you as well. Gibbs, right now on TCAT, we have an episode out on Clifford Olson Jr., a man who called himself the Beast of British Columbia. Olson was a Canadian serial killer who murdered 11 children in about 9 months between 1980 and 1981.
Yeah, he was a beast.
He was a very, very nasty guy. CrimeCon is coming up quickly.
It is.
And so if you're going to go, make sure you use our code TCAT, TCATT at checkout. You'll get 10% off your standard badge price.
That's right.
I'm excited. I can't wait for CrimeCon.
I'm super excited.
All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I am.
We are finally doing a case that a lot of people have been requesting for a number of years. The murder of Betty Gore. And, really the case against Candy Montgomery. A lot of people, I'm sure, have seen the Hulu series with Jessica Biel called Candy. That is this case. On June 13th, 1980, Betty Gore was found dead inside her home in Wylie, Texas. She had been hit with an axe 41 times.
41.
41 times. I think you and I talked a little bit on Patreon about the fact that I'm not sure if I could even split 41 logs of wood.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if I could swing the axe 41 times.
Yeah, I mean, that takes a pretty good amount of strength, endurance. Betty was killed by a woman named Candy Montgomery, a housewife and one of Betty's friends. So in part 1 of the Betty Gore, Candy Montgomery episodes, we'll discuss the lives of the two women, how they met, an affair between Candy and Betty's husband that lasted for months, and obviously the death of Betty Gore. Candy Montgomery, born Candace Wheeler, was the daughter of an Army member. She often moved throughout her childhood.
As many people in the military do.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it before. My stepmom was born into an Air Force family, and they moved around so much. I mean, she tells stories about, living in the Middle East, and then they lived in Hawaii. And then, obviously at some point it brought them here to Dayton, Wright Pat Air Force Base. So there can be a lot of movement.
Yeah.
In a military family. That's for sure.
Probably not going to be stationed one place and never moved ever. Unlikely.
That's probably not the norm.
Yeah.
In the early 1970s, Candy married a man named Pat Montgomery. Texas Monthly reported that Pat was an engineer and Candy was a secretary at Texas Instruments.
Pretty big company.
Well, in a pretty well-known company, depending on how old you are, there is a good chance that at some point in your school life, you used a Texas Instruments calculator.
Never needed it.
Well, because you had an abacus.
Yeah.
They hadn't come out yet when
okay.
you were in school. But I know my kids, they always had to have those, like, I don't know how much they were, $150, $200.
They weren't cheap.
Graphing calculators. I didn't understand how they worked, but they had to have them.
They didn't have the beep, 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 whatever that thing is you go.
No. And they didn't move little pebbles
back and forth
to figure out their mathematics. In 1977, Pat and Candy moved to Wylie, Texas with their two children. Pat made about $70,000 a year working for Texas Instruments. And then at this point, Candy was a stay-at-home mom.
Some really good money back in 77.
That's good money now.
Yeah.
$70,000. But let's take it back to 1977.
Yeah.
That is a boatload of money. If you think about it, what was the average home price in 1977?
Oh,
20 grand? I don't really know
30,
off the top of my head, but it's a far cry from where it is today. And you think today, 70,000 is not a bad salary.
1977, that was a great salary.
Yeah, it really was. According to Texas Monthly, the family lived in their dream house in the country. It was also stated that Candy didn't mind being a housewife, but she also told people that she was bored crazy.
There's just some personalities that are never going to be satisfied with whatever they do.
Yeah, I'm totally fine being a stay-at-home husband. I have no problem with it whatsoever.
I'd be okay being a stay-at-home whatever I am.
Stay-at-home whatever. But I think you're right. There are people who don't like to be cooped up in the house, no matter what they're doing. I'm not one of those people. I'm totally fine being in the house. Now, the family spent a lot of time at the First United Methodist Church of Lucas. According to Texas Monthly, the church was the center of Candy Montgomery's universe. And for some people, for a lot of people, I think the church can be that. There are people whose lives essentially revolve around the church and what's going on. And they're there, many different days throughout the week. Candy and Pat met another married couple at church, Allan and Betty Gore. Allan was also an electrical engineer with a company based in Dallas, and Betty and Candy were the same age. Texas Monthly reported that Betty and Candy met during a church service, and they became close friends. Their daughters were also friends, and they had sleepovers. And I experienced some of that as my kids were growing up.
Sure.
Friends kind of rotate, but you get to know the parents, and sometimes you find out that you have a lot in common, you like them, you invite them over, you start hanging out, doing stuff together.
Next thing you know, you're playing cards.
Sure. Going out to dinner, things like that. Betty Gore, whose maiden name was Pomeroy, was born in 1950. She grew up in Norwich, Kansas. Betty's brother, Ronald, told Snapped she was very popular in school. She was involved in all kinds of school events, music, plays, student council. She wanted to be an elementary school teacher really from the word go. That's what he said. And I always find it extremely interesting when people know so early in life what they want to do and they actually take it all the way to fruition. Because a lot of us have dreams. We all have dreams.
We do, yeah.
Some more outlandish than others. But some people make that decision at a very young age and they just never let it go. They decide that's what they want to do and they go for it.
And I knew at a very young age that I was going to be a co-host of a podcast.
I know. I remember you telling me that when you were about 5 or 6.
Yeah. One day there's going to be something called podcast, and I'm going to be a co-host.
I think that was right before that scientist drove down in the DeLorean and he handed you that sports almanac from the future, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I should have kept that thing.
You should have. I think you could have put it to use.
Yeah.
According to Texas Monthly, during college, Betty fell in love with her math teacher, Allan Gore. Betty and Allan got married in January 1970 and moved to the suburbs of Dallas. By the time Betty and Allan's daughter, Alyssa, was born, Allan was working for Rockwell International, described as an electronics conglomerate and major defense contractor.
Did you ever have eyes for one of your teachers in high school or college?
Did you just ask me if I had eyes for someone?
Yeah, you know.
What is this, the 1950s? Yeah. Yes, I will admit, I had a few teachers growing up who I found attractive. Let's put it that way.
All right. Good to know.
I will not say who they are because that would, I don't want to embarrass them, but. So in 1976, Betty got a job as a 5th grade teacher in Wylie, Texas, but she didn't enjoy the work. Texas Monthly wrote that she couldn't control her unruly students, and at the same time, she couldn't bear to be left alone at home when Allan had to travel.
I think sometimes people forget that when you're teaching those certain grades, it's not only teaching, but you're also a babysitter, disciplinary person, you're everything.
Oh,
along with trying to be an educator. It's not until they're a lot older that finally you can just do more of the education part, right?
Well, I don't know. I think some high school teachers might argue that point.
Yeah.
But don't forget, you're talking to a guy who's married to an elementary school teacher.
That's true.
And hears it every night.
Yeah.
My wife loves what she does, but there are days when it's like trying to corral kids because they just won't do what she wants them to do.
She just wants to get her lessons across to help them out, but yet you got to get them settled down before you can even start.
And she swears that the full moon changes everything.
Yeah.
She swears that.
I'm sure there's a lot of teachers that would agree. And I know that your mom's a nurse, and your mom would agree that full moon probably changes everything at the hospital. I'm sure they see a lot of weird things coming on full moons.
Yeah, I've never heard her say that, but I'm sure.
Yeah.
According to Texas Monthly, by the fall of 1978, Betty wanted to have a second baby. She started planning her pregnancy so that the baby would be born in the summer and she wouldn't have to take time off work. But it was said that Allan felt as though their sex life was completely mechanical.
I think sometimes maybe it can get like that if you're just trying to have a baby. Maybe you're just thinking,
we got to get this done.
Yeah.
It becomes more like something to check off of a box.
That's right.
Maybe.
That's also pretty smart to plan the baby around, I never did any planning when I had my babies,
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, ta-da.
Is that what you said? Ta-da.
Ta-da.
So let's take a step back, right? So what we're seeing so far is a couple of people in different marriages who maybe are not feeling fulfilled. That's kind of the sense that you get. Candy's not entirely happy being a stay-at-home mom. Allan's feeling as though his sex life is completely mechanical. And then it leads into Candy Montgomery and Allan Gore starting their affair at the end of 1978. But it was said that they discussed it for months beforehand.
And I know we're going to go through it, but it sounds strange to hear it that there was conversations that took a while
Because, well, you don't think that about affairs. That's not what you think about. Let's sit around and talk about it for 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Yeah.
You think of an affair as kind of a very spontaneous attraction that leads to bad decisions. I guess in my mind, that's what I think.
Yeah, I just don't think you need to bang out details.
Good phrase there. So essentially in late summer 1978, Candy and Allan crashed into each other during a church volleyball game. Texas Monthly wrote, "It was a harmless bump, really, and it went unnoticed by everyone else on the court, but for Candy, it brought a revelation. Allan Gore smelled sexy." This is what they wrote.
Sexy.
So obviously she must have said this.
Yeah.
I don't normally think of people playing in a church volleyball game as smelling sexy. Maybe they hadn't been playing that long. Maybe it wasn't that hot out. It is Texas in the summer.
Yeah, nice and sweaty. Yeah, the visual I have right now is that visual of
Tom Cruise in Top Gun with his shirt off.
No, that's the one you have.
Oh, okay.
The one I have is when the two guys on the basketball court, the guy's super hairy and
they're guarding each other.
And the one guy, what's the guy's name?
Will Ferrell?
The other,
Woody Harrelson?
Why can't I get Meet the Fockers guy?
Oh, I know who you're talking about. Ben Stiller?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember what movie it was, but he keeps running into this big hairy guy.
Who's all sweaty?
Yeah, and it's just gross, man.
Yeah, you need to change your thought pattern.
I do.
But here's the thing. Candy had been talking to her friends about having an affair for several weeks because she thought her life with Pat was very boring. And she told people that she wanted fireworks. So after this crash, Allan started talking and joking more with Candy, and they started talking to each other after choir practice. And essentially, Candy started fantasizing about having sex with Allan Gore.
I also think it's weird that she's talking about how she wants fireworks.
Well, doesn't everybody want fireworks?
Yeah, but would you talk to about other people? I don't know.
Well, close friends, maybe. I don't know. People disclose things that I would never disclose, I guess, to other people.
Yeah.
I mean, we all want fireworks, but fireworks, they're tough to maintain, I think, in any relationship.
Yeah, I think so, too. You can have them now and then, right?
I didn't like the way you posed that question to me. The other thing that really jumps out at me is that this is starting to kind of seem like a really bad Cinemax late night movie script.
Yeah, I can get that.
You know what I'm saying?
I can see that, yeah.
But this is real. This is really what happened.
It's definitely not one of your wife's Hallmark channel
No,
movies.
This is very far from the Hallmark movies my wife watches. According to Texas Monthly, it was a few weeks later, one night after choir practice, that Candy got into Allan's car and said she wanted to talk to him at some point about something that was bothering her. Allan said they should talk about it right now. And Candy told him, "I've been thinking about you a lot, and it's really bothering me. And I don't know whether I want you to do anything about it or not. I'm very attracted to you, and I'm tired of thinking about it, and so I wanted to tell you." And then Candy got out of his car before he could say anything.
She just dropped that little bomb and said, "Okay, see ya.
I'm out." A week later, they saw each other again. They stayed behind to clean up the church gym together. Afterwards, they got into Candy's car, and she asked Allan, "Would you be interested in having an affair?"
It's kind of a loaded question.
Very direct.
Very direct.
Not beating around the bush at all. Allan revealed that he didn't think he could because he loved Betty. And in the past, she had an affair and it hurt him. He also said that Betty had just gotten pregnant and it would be unfair to cheat on her. Candy said she was just putting the option out there and she didn't want to hurt his marriage. Allan kissed her and left the car. So, there's a lot going on. I really want to break some of this down.
Right.
It does seem like, that's very direct of her just to come out and, ask that question. And then you have Allan revealing that Betty had an affair that hurt him, but also saying it would be unfair to cheat on her because she's pregnant, almost implying or insinuating that if she wasn't pregnant, not so unfair.
Yeah, I'm all in at that point.
Yeah, I found that kind of strange thing to say.
But also to say, I can't do it because she's pregnant, but then you kiss her before you get out of the car. It's kind of like sending the wrong signal, I think.
A few weeks later, Allan called Candy on her 29th birthday and asked if she wanted to get lunch to talk about what they discussed before. They met at an auto repair shop in McKinney. I almost moved to McKinney, Texas one time.
Oh, yeah?
Years and years ago.
Yeah.
I was very, very close. So then after that, they drove to a tea house and they talked for a while before discussing the affair. Neither of them wanted to hurt their spouses. So they made the decision that they were going to think about it some more. But within a week, they discussed the affair again. They spent the next month basically having what were described as strategy session for, how they were going to go about having this affair.
It's just so bizarre.
It is. We need to do this. We got to make sure, that we plan it out, I guess, is what they were talking about.
I feel like there was whiteboards involved, and the markers are out.
Sure.
You're jotting down things and, drawing lines and things like that.
So they arranged to meet in Allan's office in Richardson and go to a restaurant. They continued discussing this affair, and specifically the fact that they were going to try to avoid any type of emotional involvement. So this is going to be purely physical. We're going to leave the emotions out of it.
Good luck with that one.
Maybe easier said than done.
Yeah. You hear people make comments that they say sex is just sex.
And maybe to some people it is, but sure as heck not to everyone.
No.
And I think what happens more often than not is at least one of the individuals involved has the emotional attachment and the other one doesn't. And that's where, things go really sideways. And I'm not even talking about like an affair situation. I'm just talking about
generally.
In late November, Candy invited Allan over to her house for lunch. She hung up a large piece of paper with 2 columns. In one column, the header was whys.
Okay.
And in the other column, the header was why nots.
She's really giving this some big time thought.
Yeah, we got to do a pro and cons list, basically, is what this is. So they ate lunch and they made their list of why they should and should not have an affair. And apparently they didn't make a decision that day, but Allan called a few days later and said that he wanted to have the affair.
I just would like to see what that list looked like when it was done.
Mm-hmm. See what ends up in what column?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, at least for Allan, there must have been more in the whys than in the why nots. Candy made a list of rules to discuss over the phone. They agreed that either person could end the affair whenever they wanted, no questions asked. They would end the affair if either person became too emotionally involved. They agreed to split all expenses for food, motel rooms, and gas, and they planned to meet on a weekday every 2 weeks.
And did they plan when they decided to end it that they weren't going to boil the pet bunny?
I mean,
on the stovetop?
In theory, I understand what they were trying to do. It just doesn't seem as though more often than not, this would work. This would actually work.
Certainly didn't work for Michael Douglas's character.
No, it didn't. According to Texas Monthly, they set a date for December 12th, 1978. And the two started seeing each other regularly at the Como Motel in Richardson. After their 3rd or 4th meeting, Candy began to have second thoughts because she realized that sex with Allan Gore probably wasn't going to get much better than it already was.
Ouch. Maybe is that like a little ouch towards him? Like,
obviously maybe it wasn't as good as she thought it was going to be. And she knew it wasn't going to get any better.
Maybe the bump at the volleyball game was the best it was going to be.
It's kind of a hit to the ego.
Yeah.
If you were to find that out. Now, Candy was also worried that she was developing feelings for Allan. Texas Monthly wrote, as time went on, they seemed less like lovers and more like best friends. They exchanged greeting cards and small gifts, and they spent a lot of time talking about their lives.
So started being more of an emotional affair.
Right. Obviously, it's not just physical.
Which some would say is worse than a physical affair.
I'm not going to touch that one, but you could be right. You could be right. I'm staying out of it. In February 1979, Candy told Allan she thought she was getting in too deep, but they still decided to continue the affair. Then in June of that year, Allan told Candy they should stop the affair for a while so that he could be there for Betty, who was in the final months of her pregnancy.
Oh, that's so nice of him to think about his pregnant wife.
Nice guy, right?
Yeah.
It's time to stop the affair because I got stuff I need to do. I need to take care of my wife. Candy agreed, and it was said that she also felt like she needed a break from the affair. In mid-June, Candy held a surprise baby shower for Betty. And then Betty and Allan's daughter, Bethany, was born in early July. When Allan and Candy resumed their affair in late July, he started to feel guilty for the first time. So I think, the one thing we can't lose sight of is that Candy and Betty are best friends.
Yeah. I mean, she's having a shower for her, a baby shower.
And then meeting her husband at the motel.
Yeah.
For rumpus room activities.
Rumpus room. Nice. But it just shows you how good of a performer Candy had to be to pull that off, to not only be around the wife of the guy she's having an affair with, to not show it and act like she's her best friend.
Yeah. I have no designs on your husband. I'm not looking at him.
And I wonder if Allan's feeling guilty because now the baby's born, right? And now he's got this additional member of his family in front of him that he's realized he's responsible for.
Yeah, well, it took him like 7 or 8 months to start feeling guilty.
Yeah.
So you could be right because that it seems like it coincided with the birth of his daughter. Allan and Betty traveled to Kansas to visit Betty's parents with the new baby. They got back on a Thursday. Allan had a scheduled meeting with Candy the next day. He knew that if he didn't go, there would be fallout. But Betty didn't want him to go to work, and she seemed suspicious. So he made an excuse to call Candy and tell her indirectly that he couldn't go. Betty made a comment on how long their conversation was. So maybe she's starting to clue in a little bit that something might be going on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're good friends with another couple, it's probably not out of the ordinary that you're going to have a conversation with the wife or the husband. But I think if you have a really long conversation, that maybe if other things are going on at the same time, somebody might feel somewhat suspicious.
I can tell you right now, if I call my buddy and his wife answers the phone, who I've known for 30, 40 years,
yeah,
that conversation is not going to last more than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It's going to be, hey, how you doing? Okay, he's not home. Hope the kids are good. It's going to be a fairly quick conversation.
It's not going to be a half an hour to an hour long.
We're not going to be dishing and spilling secrets and all that. It just doesn't work that way. It might for some. It doesn't for me.
Yeah.
After Bethany was born, Betty experienced postpartum depression, which put a strain on her marriage. One day after Candy and Pat had come back from a trip, she and Allan met at the Como Motel. That night, Betty wanted to have sex with Allan, but he didn't want to. And Betty started to cry.
Well, that's because he had it earlier with Candy.
At Allan and Candy's next meeting, Allan suggested ending the affair. Candy was upset by this. They spent the next few weeks talking over the phone. Candy told Allan she loved him. And Allan said that he thought they were too close and he was afraid he didn't love Betty anymore.
Remember those rules they set up in the beginning? How quickly those rules went out the window, right? Wasn't going to be anything but physical. And if anytime somebody wanted out, they would just end it.
No questions asked.
Exactly.
But what did they think was going to happen? What did Allan think was going to happen? That his love for Betty was going to grow?
While you were sleeping with somebody multiple times throughout the month?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So Betty became depressed. She started to complain about soreness and pain. And around September, Betty's doctor prescribed her some pain pills. Allan eventually quit his job with Rockwell International, and he started working for a company called ECS Telecommunications. He told Candy that he wouldn't be able to see her as much. But Candy asked for one more meeting. So they met at the Como Motel. A few days later, they had lunch together at a park. Again, Candy told Allan that she loved him. And he told her Betty wanted to go to Marriage Encounter, a church couples retreat for troubled marriages.
Candy has a problem letting go, and Betty's trying to save her marriage.
Because she obviously knows something's wrong. People don't ask to go to a couples retreat, couples counseling, if everything's going well.
No, I remember we went to a couples retreat.
I know.
Which was very weird because
and awkward.
We were just there because of our business relationship, but there was all these married couples around us, and I don't know. What I enjoyed about it was I found out that I was correct 99% of the time.
I thought the fact that you booked a couples massage side by side was a little odd, but I went with it.
You didn't complain.
So Allan ended the affair in October 1979 after he and Betty attended this marriage encounter. So it went on for, almost a year?
Yeah.
According to Texas Monthly, Allan decided he wanted to focus on his marriage and that he would have to tell Candy. A week later, they met for lunch in the park, and he told her he wanted to give his full resources to his family. But after he made the strongest argument he could for them breaking up, he still couldn't actually say the words. He couldn't break up with Candy.
Just not strong enough.
They met the next day, and Candy told Allan that she wouldn't call him or try to see him anymore. Then Candy and Pat attended Marriage Encounter, but it didn't have the same effect on their marriage that it did on Betty and Allan. Texas Monthly wrote both couples headed into the summer of 1980 with a sense of peaceful happiness about their lives. That would soon change.
Well, look, I think Allan and Betty, when they went to counseling, they both wanted the same thing. They wanted to work on their marriage. Mm-hmm. I think, when Candy and Pat went, I don't know if Candy was really invested into that relationship anymore. Where Pat probably was, but I don't think Candy was. I think she was still thinking about being with Allan.
Well, and that type of counseling really only works if both people are aligned in the same direction, right? Striving for the same thing. Now, what was said was that the Gores and Montgomerys continued their friendship after the affair ended. So, again, I don't know if Pat had an inkling. There wasn't really much in the research up to this point in time about whether he knew anything was going on. I think Betty had some suspicions.
Sure.
But it either couldn't have been much more than that, or the counseling kind of quashed everything because the friendship continued.
I can guarantee you, if there was somebody either having an affair or you suspected having an affair with your spouse, there's no way you would remain friends. That person would not be coming to your house, hanging out, playing cards, watching movies with you and your wife. I don't believe that. I know that I wouldn't want that.
No, I wouldn't either.
It'd just be like, I'm pretty sure something is going on or went on. I think I would have probably said something. I just wouldn't be like, I don't want him here. I'd be like, I'm going to tell you why I don't want you here.
Again, I just don't know to what extent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I get it.
Each person knew.
But both Allan and Candy are making it hard to move on if they're still going to hang out around each other.
Yeah, it couldn't have been easy.
No.
So on June 13th, 1980, Allan left home for a business trip in Minnesota. He had trouble getting in contact with Betty that day. Allan promised to call Betty at the airport. He called twice, didn't get an answer, but he assumed that Betty was probably on a walk with the baby. Later that evening, Allan called home again and didn't receive an answer. He thought it was strange because Betty wouldn't leave the house in the evening without telling someone. So Allan called his neighbor, Richard Parker, and asked him to check on Betty. Parker knocked on the door, rang the doorbell, and he waited for an answer. Then he returned to the phone and told Allan that Betty didn't come to the door.
I think you or I would be panicking at this point.
Maybe panicking is a strong word. I would have some concern.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd be panicking yet because I don't know that something's wrong.
You're right. You'd be concerned. You'd be worried. And you're not going to just go to bed. You're going to continue to keep calling to get some kind of confirmation.
Oh, yeah. I'm not just going to assume that everything's okay, but there's still a lot of things in play.
Yeah.
My wife could be over at the neighbor's house or,
And you got to remember, this is a time when people didn't have cell phones yet. So
it was harder to get in touch with people.
You're at the mercy of someone being around the telephone, at that time.
So the next thing Allan did was he called Candy and asked if she'd seen Betty. Candy said she saw her in the morning when she stopped by the house to pick up a swimsuit for Alyssa, who was staying with the Montgomerys. And she said Betty seemed fine. So Allan went to eat dinner with his coworkers. He got back to his room around 10 p.m. and called again. Betty didn't answer. Okay, you said something about panic. I think at that point, the concern grows to a different level. Is it panic yet? I don't know that it is, but it's definitely a higher level.
Now you're thinking, is there something wrong?
Yeah, because you've got a small baby. And most people at 10 o'clock at night, they're home with their small infants.
Right. If they aren't, does that mean that the baby had to go to the hospital? Did mom have to go to the hospital?
Yeah, it could mean a lot of different things. Allan called Richard Parker again and asked him to see if Betty's car was in the garage. So Parker went up to the chain link fence between their houses and he looked into the garage from there. He told Allan that there was only one car in the garage. The garage was open and the lights were on. Allan was worried that there was some kind of emergency. He called the local hospital and the police, but none of them had any information about Betty. Allan called Candy again. She offered to go check the house, but Allan told her he would get the neighbors to check again. So by this time, it's around 11 p.m. Allan called Richard again and asked him to check all the doors in the garage. This time, Richard walked onto the driveway. From this angle, he could see two cars in the garage. One car was pulled in so far that he couldn't see it from back where he was at the fence. He could see a light under the utility room door, but it was locked. He told Allan that he felt like something was wrong because both cars were there, the lights were on, but nobody was answering the door. Allan gave Richard permission to get into the house any way he could. So now I think we're at your level of it's 11 o'clock at night. My wife is not answering. The panic is setting in.
Yeah.
I don't care if you got to bust through the window like an Avenger.
I need some answers.
You got to get in there and see what's going on. Allan also called another neighbor named Jerry McMahon and asked him to check the house. Jerry knocked on the utility room door and received no answer. He tried to force open a sliding glass door, but he couldn't. Jerry looked in the windows. He rang the doorbell, but again, no one answered. Allan also told Jerry to do whatever it took to get inside the house. Jerry called his friend Lester Gaylor, another neighbor. So we have three neighbors trying to get into this house. I think they all at this point have the green light to do whatever's necessary.
Yeah.
Richard Parker found these two guys in the alley behind the Gore house. And Richard had actually sold the Gores their house a few years before, and he brought his realtor's keys.
Yeah, back then you had realtor keys that were keyed to fit almost any lock that was on the market. That's before lock boxes and things like that.
Seems very unsafe, but
very unsafe.
But none of the men could open the sliding glass door, and the realtor's keys weren't working on the utility door. Richard went to the front door and was surprised to find that it was unlocked.
During the research, I heard this and I thought, I don't know why somebody didn't try that initially.
Like, why is that not your first instinct? I don't know. To me, I always think if a door is going to be locked, it's going to be the front door.
So why not try?
If somebody's going to leave one unlocked, it's going to be like a back patio door or, a door that they let the dogs in and out of all the time.
Right.
That's kind of my way of thinking. Maybe that's what they were thinking as well, which really doesn't make all that much sense when you think about it. Is a robber or someone intent on doing you harm going to come in the front door? No, they're most likely going to find the point of entry that's more hidden, less well lit. So these guys called Betty's name again, and then they went inside the house. Jerry saw a dark substance in the bathroom. They found Bethany in her crib. She was in distress. Richard took her to his house to call the police.
Well, I'm sure that newborn baby was just crying up a storm.
And it was Lester Gaylor who was the one who found Betty when he opened the utility room door. He didn't actually see her body, but when he opened the door, he described it later as seeing oceans of blood. Apparently, he peeked into the room and said, "She's blown her head off." According to Oxygen, her head and body were so badly mutilated that the men thought she had suffered a shotgun blast.
It's pretty bad.
Now, we have a lot of descriptions of very violent acts in the episodes that we do. Oceans of blood is so descriptive.
Yeah.
Hauntingly descriptive. And, to think about a shotgun blast to the head and how much damage that does for someone to think that's what happened to someone. Now we know that's not what happened. We already said up front, you start to get that picture of 41 axe blows and what that would actually do to someone, to the point where it made it look as though this poor woman's head was almost blown away, blown off.
Actually kind of makes me queasy thinking about it.
It's nasty stuff. When Lester went to grab the phone to call the police, Allan called the house. And they had to tell Allan that Betty was dead. And they told him that they thought she'd been shot. So at 11:30 p.m., Allan called Candy and told her that Betty was dead and asked Candy if she would continue taking care of Elisa. So, man, you want to talk about tough. You're away from home.
Yeah.
You're worried about your wife. You call, one of your neighbors picks up inside your own home, and they tell you that your wife's dead. They believe she's been shot. All right, you got to try to process that. But you also have 2 children that you have to think about as well. So you have to start making some calls. You had to call Candy and say, "My wife is dead.
Need your help.
Need your help. Can you continue to watch my oldest?" And I'm sure he was worried about the baby as well.
Meanwhile, he's in Minnesota and has to get back to Texas.
Must have been, I want to use the word helpless, but I know it's more than that. It's helpless plus heartbreak, agony, kind of a bunch of different things rolled up, into one. So when the police got to the house, they found a 3-foot axe in the utility room. Betty's autopsy would show that she was hit 41 times with the axe. 28 of the blows struck her in the head and face.
Now we know why. It looked like a shotgun hit her in the face.
And for me, it's almost impossible not to picture that. And it's a horrible, horrible image. The police believe that based on the brutality of the attack, the killer knew Betty, but she didn't have any known enemies. She wasn't involved in, any type of illegal activities. It was a real mystery as to who would want to kill Betty Gore.
But I get what they're saying, because of the brutality of the murder. What else could you think?
Well, I think more often than not, as we've talked about many times, it kind of screams out the type of rage that comes from someone who knows you has a problem with you, as opposed to, let's say, a thrill killer or a person who derives some kind of sick pleasure from killing. Could they inflict that many? Sure, and they do.
Yeah.
Sometimes. But I think more often than not, police go to that side first and think it's got to be somebody who knows the victim.
Especially to wield that axe 41 times.
Because it doesn't take 41 blows.
Exactly.
And it didn't take 41 blows to kill Betty Gore.
Yeah.
It may have only taken 3 or 4. I don't know the number, but you have to figure that a good percentage of those blows were unnecessary. So why did they keep coming?
And as you mentioned earlier, the guy saw what they described as oceans of blood. And I'm thinking, how would you even clean that up? Could you even clean it up? Obviously, the killer didn't.
But they tried. And that's one of the things that police noticed, but they assumed that the killer must have given up because the amount of blood was just too much. The police found a bloody thumbprint on a freezer and a bloody shoe print in the laundry room. There was blood on the bathroom wall and drain, which indicated that the killer most likely took a shower. There was also a pot of burnt coffee in the house, which indicated to police that Betty was killed in the morning.
I can see why someone would want to take a shower after that. I can't imagine how much blood was on the killer.
Whoever did that was covered in blood. There's just no way around it.
And I'm also thinking there was a pot of coffee. So was that just for Betty, or did Betty know somebody and decide to make coffee for her and whoever came over?
Oh, that's a good point.
Which could have been the killer.
Now, that wouldn't work for me because I actually drink a pot of coffee every morning. I also sometimes make a pot not in the morning. So you could not use that same deductive reasoning.
That's true.
For me.
You drink coffee all the time.
I drink a lot of coffee. I think one of the first thoughts on the part of police was whether Allan killed Betty before he got on his flight. But I think they abandoned that one pretty quickly. The bloody footprint wasn't the correct size. Former investigator Stephen Deffenbaugh told Snap that they were looking for someone small, like a child or a woman.
So pretty small footprint then, if you're going to look for a child.
Yeah, or a really small dude, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, you wear size 4s, so, I mean, it's not a big shoe size.
It's Yugoslavian 4, which is compatible to 11 in U.S. So,
I get you.
Yeah.
You're always bragging about your size 4s. One of the things in the research that I found interesting was that investigators initially suspected that the killing was inspired by The Shining, which had just premiered in May 1980.
Well, you recall that movie.
I do. Obviously, he's wielding an axe. He's coming through the door with it. Steve Deffenbaugh told People magazine it looked like a scene from a horror film. It was a Friday the 13th. Our thought was we had a copycat of the movie The Shining.
You know, that's a good point. It was Friday the 13th when this occurred.
And I had to look it up because I wasn't sure when Friday the 13th came out.
Yeah.
It came out the exact same month and year as The Shining. So 1 month before the murders took place. So he said it was a copycat of The Shining. It sounds to me like it was probably more a copycat, if it was a copycat, of Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
On June 14th, the police reported that Betty was killed with an axe and that they had found a footprint in the home. The next day, Candy received a lot of phone calls about Betty. When Candy heard from someone over the phone that the police found a bloody footprint, she used a pair of garden shears to cut the rubber sandals she wore that day. Prosecutors later argued that this was done to destroy evidence of the pattern of her soles. I have never heard of that. It's actually quite brilliant.
Yeah.
I don't want to give this woman credit, but
No.
it's quite brilliant.
It's one way to destroy evidence.
But, you talk about it all the time. A decision has to be made on the part of the police as to what they're going to release to the media. Because releasing certain things can really have negative effects. And I think this is a great example.
Sure it is.
Where you're disclosing the fact that you have this bloody footprint, which leads to what? A person cutting up the evidence that would match the bloody footprint, which they may not have done had that information not been disclosed.
Yeah, exactly. Because until that was said, she might have held on to those.
Yeah. I don't think there would maybe have been any reason to get rid of them unless they had blood on them or something like that, which they probably did. Oxygen reported that a young girl who was friends with Alyssa told the police that she went to the Gore house on the morning of June 13th. She knocked and no one answered. Around 11 a.m., she saw Candy Montgomery leaving the house. So Candy was brought in for questioning. She said that Alyssa had slept over the night before and she went to the house to get a swimsuit from Betty. She then went to church and taught a Bible class to children. Candy was questioned several times after Betty was killed, but her story was said to have always been airtight. That's the word they used in a lot of the reporting.
So it sounds like she had a pretty good alibi.
The Fort Worth Star-Telegram reported that in the days after Betty's death, the police were looking for a mysterious stranger who was seen near the church. The stranger was seen on June 16th, after Betty's funeral. Justice of the Peace John Newton followed and took pictures of this stranger. The stranger drove past his office in downtown Wylie several times. Officers admitted that the driver might be their only possible lead. A 22-year-old transient was arrested on the 15th for public intoxication and questioned about Betty, but he was released the next day. A waitress told the police that he said he had to leave because they had found that woman. But the man ultimately proved he was in New Orleans when Betty was killed.
Well, when you don't have any leads and you find out there was a mysterious man lingering around town.
Well, and if he really did tell this waitress that he had to leave because he found that woman.
Right.
Okay. Is it prove anything? No, but are police going to be very suspicious? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think they have to check it out.
You know, for me, it just kind of emphasizes, be careful what you say. You know, even if you think you're joking around or whatever, some of that stuff's going to come back to bite you in the rear end.
Yeah.
Now, luckily, this guy could prove that he was in New Orleans. What if he couldn't?
He could be screwed.
We've seen people convicted with very little evidence who ultimately were proven not to have committed the crime. Allan Gore was interviewed on June 16th, a few hours after Betty's funeral. He said that overall his marriage was in a good place, but he and Betty had an argument before he left for his trip. Betty thought she was pregnant again. Now, it's good that he's being truthful in the situation.
Sure.
But again, it's also going to cause police to take a look at him.
Not unnatural for him to be one of the main suspects at first.
Anyway,
yeah.
But when you tell police you had an argument with your wife before you left, before she was murdered, okay, that's going to be something. On the morning of June 17th, Allan called the police because he felt as though he needed to get something off his chest. He admitted that he and Candy Montgomery had an affair that lasted 4 months. Like I said, it was almost a year.
Right.
The police thought Candy was telling the truth until they learned about the affair, because obviously that provided her a pretty strong motive for murder.
Kind of shifts the gears.
Yeah, because without that, what are the police looking at? Well, here's Betty's best friend.
Yeah.
Why would she kill her?
She's taking care of the oldest daughter.
Yeah. What did she have against her? Now you find out that, well, she might want Betty's husband for herself.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? You do it by eliminating Betty. According to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, in late June, news outlets reported that Allan Gore hired an attorney from Dallas named Mike Gibson.
Must have been a really good attorney.
Of all names.
Yeah.
Mike Gibby Gibson. Gibson said that he would give Allan legal advice as it relates to the death of his wife, and said that Allan was not a suspect in Betty's death. Now, I tease you about your age from time to time.
Sure.
But I did not know that you were an attorney in the Dallas area in 1980.
Well, you know, like I said, you said, I went to med school at a really, really, really young age. Got a little bored. Decided to do a little law.
Went to law school.
Yeah. So, you know, to represent somebody when I was, 17 years old or whatever I was at that time.
Sure.
It was monumental.
In such a big case.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
So I think this is a good stopping part. This is such a big case. We had to break it up into two parts. I mean, we have got so much going on, but we have so much more to come. That's what, is kind of amazing about this case. We're doing it on Unsolved. And the very first thing we said, Gibbs, is that this woman killed Betty Montgomery by hitting her with an axe 41 times.
Yeah.
So obviously that's giving a little bit away,
Right.
Not the details, but, kind of the overall structure of what happens ultimately in this case. So in part 2, we'll discuss the rest of the police investigation, Candy Montgomery's arrest, her infamous murder trial, and the aftermath for the people involved in the case.
Which is all really good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot to this story.
Yeah. Just goes to show you, we kind of talked about the Michael Douglas movie, Fatal Attraction.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about this. I would say that majority of affairs do not end well.
No, I would agree. I mean, I'm not sure that most of them end amicably, with both sides saying, yeah, it's good. We'll just we'll just go our separate ways.
Right.
Somebody's feelings are going to get hurt. And that's not even with affairs. I mean, even just you look at relationships.
Sure.
How many of them actually end amicably or equally, where both parties make the decision that, yeah, it's in our best interest to walk away? It happens. I can't imagine it's the norm. No. And I definitely don't think it's the norm when it comes to affairs. And I'll take it a step further and say, it's definitely not the norm when you're having an affair with a couple who are all friends.
Yeah.
How is that going to work out?
I don't think it can.
I don't think it can either. Obviously, it didn't in this situation. Right. This one just happened to end tragically. Not all of them do, but you would think at the very least, at some point, the friendship's going to crash and burn. If the marriages don't crash and burn, at the very least, the friendships between the couples is going to fall apart.
It's not like you can still stay friends. Go, hey, remember 5 years ago when that crazy thing happened where you were sleeping with her and and I was working all the time.
And I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, that was really crazy, wasn't it, man?
Yeah. It just does not work that way.
No.
I will say this. The one thing I will struggle with from this first part, this episode 1, unfortunately, we'll probably have to talk about it again, is the image I have in my mind of Betty Gore and what happened to her.
Yeah.
That's going to be tough to shake out because very graphic, and I'm painting the picture myself. And so I may even be making it worse than it is, but I don't know if I am. I think it was horrendous.
Oh, it had to be horrendous. I mean, I remember in my lumberjack days cutting down trees and swinging that axe, 41 times. I'm telling you, I don't know too many people can do that.
The damage.
Yeah.
Just the sheer damage from that. All right, buddy. We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Janelle from San Diego. I'm a very long-time listener. I just wanted to call in and first off, thank you guys for everything that you do for the victims and their families. Thank you for giving them the light that they deserve and the spotlight that we all would want if we were in their same situation. I do have a case suggestion for you guys. It is actually somebody that I went to high school with. His name is Elijah Diaz. His nickname is Bear Diaz. He is a Native American who went missing without a trace, and there's just a lot of twists and turns in the case, and unfortunately I feel like it has gone unseen since time has passed. So I would love to hear you guys cover that on True Crime All the Time Unsolved. And again, thank you guys for everything that you do. You guys are wonderful. I am not Team Mike. I am not Team Gibby. I am Team True Crime All the Time. So bless you guys and have a great holiday.
Yeah, I really like that suggestion. If you get time, try to email any information you have to truecrimegibby@gmail.com so we can take a closer look at it.
Yeah, because that sounds like one that we really, really need to look into.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Gibby. It's Steven. Just wanted to call and let you guys know once again that I really appreciate the podcast and the most recent episode. I've been listening since about September, August, and I'm fully caught up, and I've been caught up for about a month now. So I'm going to be switching over to Unsolved here very shortly. But I just wanted to say I very much appreciate everything you guys do, your research, the banter, just everything. You guys are an awesome podcast, and I appreciate it. You guys get me through a lot of hard days at work and just a lot of hard days in general. So keep up the good work, Mike, and keep your own time ticking. You guys have a great day, and Merry Christmas.
Oh, same to you, and appreciate the kind words. So I'm putting this on Unsolved because based on his timeline,
Yeah.
he listens to a lot of episodes. He caught up very quickly.
He'll be here before we know it.
Exactly. So he'll hear this on Unsolved sooner than later.
Hey guys, sorry I'm using my inside voice because I don't have anyone else to call. It's Oliver Stockbridge. I'm sorry, I'm just too excited. I just found that I'm pregnant and I don't have anyone to tell because my husband's not home. And we told him we wouldn't tell anyone until a couple weeks, and I'm just so excited I have to share it with somebody. And I listen to y'all all day long because it feels like y'all are the only people I can tell. You don't have to play this on the show. I'm just so excited. Oh my gosh. Okay. Have a good day. I hope everyone's feeling good. I had to share. Bye.
That's awesome news.
Yeah, I really, when I heard it the first time, I got a little excited. I could hear the excitement in her voice, which made me excited and just kind of gave me this really cool, warm feeling. I think back to kind of finding out from my wife that she was pregnant and how that made me feel. And so that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and thank you for naming the baby Gibby.
Yeah. I just thought it was interesting that she wasn't sure who to call. She's going to call us and leave us a voicemail. I love it. Love it. All right, buddy. That is it for part 1, the murder of Betty Gore. And, obviously the case against Candy Montgomery. We'll get into more of that in part 2. But that's it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.